It's Thursday, August 26th, 2021. The time now is 2:15 p.m. And we are here in the Navajo Nation Council Chambers in Window Rock, Arizona on the Navajo Nation. I do have Madam Chair Charles Newton and Honorable Paul Begay here with me in the chambers. Presiding as myself, Seth Amon, Speaker of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Before we continue on down, let's go ahead and get a roll call, and we'll go ahead and move forward after that, just to make sure we have a quorum.
Good afternoon, honorable members. Honorable Elmer Begay. Honorable Elmer Begay. Honorable Elmer Begay did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr.
Delegate Key Allen is present. Thank you.
Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. answered. Roll call. Honorable Paul Begay.
Delegate Paul Begay is present.
Honorable Paul Begay is present. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton is present. Honorable Amber Canaz-Bakrati.
Shouted Delegate Amber Canaz-Bakrati. I'm on the call. Thank you.
Honorable Amber Canaz-Bakrati answered. Roll call. Honorable Speaker Seth Damon.
Present.
Honorable Speaker Seth Damon is present. Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr.
Here, I'm here.
Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr. answered. Roll call. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo answered. Roll call. Honorable Vince James.
Delegate James present.
Honorable Vince James answered. Roll call. Honorable Rick Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez is present. Thank you.
Honorable Rick Nez answered. Roll call. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Present.
Delegate Slater present. Can you hear me? Hello?
Honorable Carl Slater is present. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Present.
Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. answered. Roll call. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Green,
Honorable-
I'm present.
Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. answered. Roll call. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So answered. Roll call. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Edison Wanika. Honorable Edison Wanika. Honorable Edison Wanika did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Edmund Yazi. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair did not answer. Roll call. Going back up. Honorable Elmer Begay. Honorable Elmer Begay. Honorable Elmer Begay did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland.
Freeland present. Sorry, thank you.
Honorable Mark Freeland answered. Roll call. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Charlene So did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So is excused. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Charlene So is excused. Honorable Edison Winika. Honorable Edison Winika. Honorable Edison Winika did not answer. Roll call. Honorable Edmund Yazzie.
Here.
Honorable Edmund Yazzie answered. Roll call. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair did not answer. Roll call. Speaker, you have 15 members present, including yourself.
This is Delegate Halona. I'm present as well. I missed my roll call. Please include me.
Honorable Pernell Halona answered. Roll call. 16 members present.
Thank you very much. With 16 members present, colleagues, let's go ahead and continue on down. That invocation, we did have an invocation from Honorable Stewart this morning. Thank you, Honorable Stewart. We'll go ahead and recognize that. And thank you for praying for the nation. And colleagues, let's continue to apprised by that prayer that we had earlier this morning. That, let's go ahead and move on down to item number 2 on our proposed agenda. Recognizing guests and visiting officials. Are there any recognitions, colleagues? If there are no recognitions at this time, let's go ahead and continue on down. Item number 3,
Delegate
review and
Juanita,
adopt
call
the
the
agenda. Mr. Rico, if you could read the agenda into the record.
Thank you, Speaker and members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Proposed agenda of the 24th Navajo Nation Council special session via telecommunication Thursday, August 26, 2021. Navajo Nation Council Chambers, 20 Winter Rock, Navajo Nation. Presiding Honorable Seth Damon, Speaker, 24th Navajo Nation Council. 1, call meeting to order, roll call invocation. 2, recognize guests and visiting officials to the Navajo Nation. 3, review and adopt the agenda. 4, reports, none. 5, old business, none. 6, new business. New business A, legislation 0169-21. 7, close of session, announcements, adjournment. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. That, colleagues, on our agenda, is there a motion?
Vice Chair Smith, motion.
Mr. Smith, is there a second?
Delegate James, second.
Juanita.
Honorable Wanika, that, thank you, colleagues. At this time, is there any comments, additions, deletions to our agenda today? Only twice.
Delegate James here.
Honorable James.
Good afternoon, Speaker Shinala and members of the council. I know that in the past, I brought up the issue for the Ganado Fire District legislation. Can we add that to the agenda?
My listing. Just shot this.
Speaker, this is Delegate McGee calling in.
Honorable Gay, welcome to the club. 125-21 or -20? I don't have it on here.
Yeah, that's now he's listening.
Oh. Okay. With that, thank you. On legislation 125-21, sponsored by Honorable Vince James, adding on as amendment number 1 after legislation 0169-21. Well, actually, that's a 2/3 legislation. Mr. Rico, if you could read into the record what 125-21 is. Oh, never mind, I will. This is an action related to the emergency of the Navajo Nation Council, allocating $2,644,380 from the CSN fund to the Division of Community Development for the purchase of fire trucks and ambulances for the Ganado Fire District, adopting the CSN Ganado Fire District Emergency Vehicle Expenditure Plan pursuant to 12 NNC subsection 2501 to 2508, sponsored by Honorable Vince James, co-sponsored by Madam Chair Charles Newton. That, colleagues, is there a second on Amendment 1 to add this legislation onto today's agenda? Second by Madam Chair Charles Newton. That, colleagues, this legislation is a 2/3 legislation. So if this amendment does pass, this legislation goes to the front, which will be new business item number A. With that, colleagues, any comments, questions? Let me go to the board at this time on amendment number 1.
Chair Delegate Henio.
Chairman Henio, floor is yours.
Yeah, this is to the Speaker Davis of the 34th Navajo Nation Council. Just a question here. Is this really an emergency now? It has been introduced several weeks ago and time has passed and we don't see it as an emergency now. We should take it through the regular committee process. That's my comment. Thank you.
Just to reiterate, in the past, Honorable Chairman Henio, this is the time to clarify. If council approves this and adds this on the agenda, then collectively council approved it to state that this is an emergency. To clarify the emergency and the base of the emergency, I'll turn that over to Honorable James. Honorable James.
Ikihat another speaker, other members of the council, other Shia Jamie Henio Bahnadins Kidigi, Dikodo Ganado Fire District, Ada Nahot it, the no other Nadins Kidako, Shesido, Kodosi, Zenigido, Besi, Zenigi, not Tosness, Sodigi, 8 Ani, a Ben Hitch, Nahot it, Kode, Nahot it has lain a large Iki, Jo ya at conduct the whole just the Ganado Fire Department is transporting individuals in suburban as their ambulance unit. Just because the vehicles are so outdated that they are all in service and some have been in service and are not able to be repaired. Here Ganado Fire District ako. Kodo has anigi jo kot a large and kisil so ba yel kit ako halit out ya di nisa ako di no the hala ba yel kit ako. I'm trying to ask you, my colleagues, that this is an emergency due to the fact that we are delivering life-saving services to our Navajo people. And that's an emergency. Nikita do hot nil da hola. But she says do kodo chinali yeshke ni yahiki hot basi zenko. Hot ashon did ya hot bana ni ka do zagi hot hajo ba di nido ada de yese kode nas kito da hot suburban patient ben gyo da na halia da ada the song na haba akot no think ako ashon de yeah, that's the reason why it's an emergency to deliver life-saving services for our Navajo people. Kot not aba na speak ole yeah.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, any other comments, questions? I don't have anybody else in the queue at this time for amendment number 1.
Speaker David, Delegate Claudia.
Honorable Madam Chair Crotty, and then Honorable Slater on amendment number 1.
Yes.
Remember,
yes,
colleagues,
thank you.
remember, colleagues, too, as well, we are in Navajo Nation Council, so you do have 5 minutes on every motion.
Thank you, Speaker. I appreciate that update or reminder. Speaker, colleagues, thank you, Delegate James, for this amendment. Speaker, my question is, in light of the legislative, the concern and adding to the agenda, and looking at the 2/3 rule. Is there a way through this motion we can add it to the agenda, but after the audit? I'm trying to look at my code book and my rule book just so that we could move forward with the audit in addition to this issue. Thank you, Speaker, and I'll reserve my time.
Reserve your time at 4 minutes, 17 seconds. Madam Chair, I can't find anything in the book just to say that that we can still move forward with the audit. 2/3 legislations must take precedence according to the code, council rules of order, in order for us to go ahead and act on those prior to going to main motion legislations. Let's council. Maybe if is that I don't know if there's other additional interpretation on that, and then also to clarify too, to help assist on Chairman Hino's question about the emergency portion of this legislation.
Speaker, I am greatly apologize. I had somebody in talking to me and I did not hear the question. Can it be repeated?
Is there any way that we can go to the audit prior to a 2/3 legislation? Even though the audit's a simple majority legislation, I'm saying that according to the council rules of order that we have to complete the 2/3 legislation first. And in this case, Honorable Chairman, our Honorable Vince James is in his amendment is adding on 125-21, which is a citizen legislation, which is a 2/3 legislation. So Madam Chair, Amber Crotty's question was, is there anywhere in the code, does it say that possibly waiving that or moving something to address the audit first? And I said, I've never done that before. It's always been known. I do think it does say in the code, I'm trying to look, but it does say for sure in the council rules of order that you must complete the 2/3 legislations before we go on to a simple majority legislations.
Okay, just a moment. Speaker, I am not finding, unless Mr. Rico can point it out, I'm not finding in the code that 2/3 legislations are required to go first. Can somebody point out somebody said it was in the code, but I'm not finding it. Can somebody point out where they think they found it?
Dana, it's
Yes.
164A13, the last sentence. It says
Can
resolution
you
submitted
read-
for
I
the
can't-
council's resolution submitted for the council's session agenda shall, to the extent possible, be listed in the order received, except those resolutions requiring 2/3 vote or those resolutions included in the consent agenda. So 2/3 or consent agendas would need to go first.
Hang on just a second. I'm not sure that interpretation is consistent. I
What?
need to consult with, just hang on, please.
Also, it does say on Navajo Nation Council Rules of Order, Rule 6B, all legislation requires a vote of 2/3 of the council in order to be adopted, shall be placed on the agenda before all other legislations and shall be considered by the council before all other legislations. That provision shall not be subject to suspension pursuant to Rule 24. So it can't be suspended, Madam Chair. Everybody.
Speaker, this is Dana. If you want to hear more from me, I've consulted with some attorneys in the office.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So when you're, so to the question is, can the CSN legislation be heard after the audit legislation? And I believe that the answer is yes. If you waive your council, you would have to waive your council rules. But because what the code says, and it's hugely poorly written, but nonetheless, it's in the code. It says, I'm looking at 164A13, and the last sentence of that says, resolution submitted for the council session agenda to the extent possible be listed in the order received, except those resolutions requiring 2/3 vote or those resolutions included in a consent listing. So A13 does not actually state that 2/3 legislations have to be heard first. I think it intended to, but that's not what it says. So I do believe you can put the CSN legislation after the other legislations if you waive your council rule. Thank you, Speaker.
Point of order, Speaker.
Point of order, Madam Chair Charles. Go ahead.
Thank you, Speaker. So, in the code Dana read, I believe she said 164.13. Speaker, I guess I'm a little bit confused as to where she is providing us guidance that we don't consider 2/3 votes. As long as I've been in council, and I know that it hasn't been as long as others, but we've always entertained the 2/3 legislation first. If we change the rules at this point, we set precedent, which means that that 164A13 would just be a recommendation. Is that what I'm hearing, Speaker? Can I get a little bit more clarification? Because obviously Dana is our legislative counsel, but I guess I'm just not seeing where she's interpreting that the 2/3 vote legislation don't come first, Speaker.
Speaker, this is Ms. Bobroff. What I have said is in 164A13, and if you read the last sentence, it says resolution submitted for the council session agenda shall, to the extent possible, be listed in the order received, except those resolutions requiring 2/3 votes or those resolutions included in a consent listing. Stop. That's the end of the sentence. That sentence, that provision does not say that the 2/3 legislation has to go first. Council, though, has under Rule 6, interpreted by Council Rule 6, Council has determined that 2/3 legislations do need to go first on the agenda. However, I do not read the codes to mandate that they go first. So if council wishes for a 2/3 legislation not to go first, then they need to waive their Rule 6. Thank you, Speaker. I hope that's clear.
Thank you. This is the way I'm going to make the ruling. We're in council session. Per 164.13, it doesn't clarify as much as what data is indicated, but council understood that when they presented that, and then they clarified it even further in our Navajo Nation Council Rules of Order. Under Rule 6, it says that all legislations required a vote of 2/3 of the council in order to be adopted shall be placed on the agenda before all other legislations and shall be considered by the council before all other legislations. This provision shall not be subject to suspension pursuant to Rule 24. If you look at Rule 24, it was amended on Cap 46-18. So when it was amended, and then you look to the suspensions of Rule 24, which is suspensions of rules. So they're not subjugated to the rules. So at this time, my decision is that I agree with Ms. Barbroff on the intent to say that, but Navajo Nation Council, we have to follow our rules of order. And in this case, Navajo Nation Council amended the rules of order back in CAP-46-18. And in that, it indicated that we have to consider our 2/3 legislations first. So that's what we have to do. So we must consider the 2/3 legislations prior. That, back to the main motion.
Speaker Devon, request to speak, sir. Delegate
Yes.
Rick Nez.
Well, let me put you in the queue.
Thank you.
Honorable Slater, floor is yours.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you to the motioning party for offering the amendment. Background. I support the intent of the amendment, and I think it'd be prudent to investigate seeking an amendment to the comprehensive budget to include this. That's happening at the same time within this month, and I'd be supportive of that endeavor. But right now, putting it at the front end of this NABI session, or sorry, the special council session that's been devoted to the annual audit, I think would be imprudent, and I would just ask the motioning party to reconsider and seek an appropriation through the comprehensive budget for this particular legislation. And if not then perhaps a UUFB request after we appropriate the budget. So, Speaker, this is on the amendment, so I'll waive my time. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, moving on down, Vice Chair Smith, or not Vice Chair Smith, Chairman Nez, floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker Damon, honorable members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council, Shanala, Honorable Vince James, indicate to get a motion in like the 2/3 vote Ninigi by Yatiki legislation emergency. What you could do, because council does want to debate 0169-21. Therefore, Shanala, you could withdraw your motion and wait until after 169 is approved, and you can make a motion to suspend the floor rules and add it to the agenda. Therefore, we don't have to debate your legislation up front. So that would be my recommendation, Shanala. So just my recommendation, Shanala. So I reserve my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 4 minutes flat. That, moving on down, we go back to Honorable James.
Yat Shanale, Speaker, Nana, Ado, members of the council, Ado Nana, Nada, Honorable Witness, Ado Kodo Bayet Kito Belcher, Zido, if Ishana Hodolzen, of course, Shizido, Bahasito, how do we take that into consideration as us not supporting services to our Navajo people? This is life-saving services to our people. When is it that we're going to take that as a priority at all? I know there's a lot of things that are a priority, but this is as we continue to prolong this, you know what? I mean, I really don't know how to react to how the support is for the district that I serve. So are we waiting to react? Are we waiting for a death to occur in my district to find out how adamant that the notified district is going, what they're going through? Do we have to get on the front page of the newspaper articles to tell ourselves how important we try to push this legislation? Or do we just wait for another house to burn down? How many homes have to burn down in order for us to realize as a council that this is a service that needs to be taken care of as well. 我会计17多版是 case 的事，把的好记就是都难审的可。It's a very touchy matter, and I guess we'll just put money before the people. We'll put a report before the people. And when is it that we're going to understand that we need to understand that how we're going to protect and serve our people, the oath that we took. So, so with that, I'll just go ahead and withdraw my motion, and I guess we'll just wait until we hit the front page, until death occurs in my district, or several homes burn down in my district, or fire get out of fire district to provide the services.
Point of order.
Thank you.
Order. No.
Point of order, Speaker.
Honorable Paul Begay.
Thank you, Speaker. Colleagues, ich war verantwortlich. Relation de Nechedon Himasondon Hinaleda A. Nahatui Yen Hadati. There, Hotigin got so the wind will gay at so oh, Digin Nakikosad, he hit me go old, so the wind. But so Digin. A console bar on window. There, Hotigin of instant. So what she is out of the yet, so they just keep it on the name there. By just keep a hotel, Hakahole, fashion, and then never gay. Oh, when the deep art was gay, Nick a hoidor less shiny, then the other thing, no, access. Fashion the banan horse come. Let's respect the teaching of our old, our elderly. Fashion the over now come. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Paul Begay, for your words and your comments and the direction that you put forth. With that, I don't know, Vince James did complete his, did indicate that he was going to withdraw his motion. Honorable Vince James withdrawing his motion on amendment number 1. With that, Madam Chair, Charles Lewin as a second.
Speaker, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Okay. That, colleagues, we are back onto the main motion.
Honorable Eugene So.
That, colleagues, I don't have, Honorable Eugene So in the queue. Honorable Eugene So on the main motion of the accepting our agenda today.
I was trying to stay out of your meetings because of the birth of my auntie, but I wanted also make an amendment to include the debated emergency legislation 0178-21. And I reserve my time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now? Thank you. Sorry, colleagues, I did kick off. The Honorable Eugene So, thank you for being here with us. Again, sorry for your loss. The question was, reiterate, can you Was it? Okay. Amendment number 1. Honorable Eugene So, 0178-21. Motioning party. That, Mr. Rico, could you read in what 178-21 is?
Thank you, Speaker. Members of the 24th Nomination Council. Tracking number 0178-21, an action relating to an emergency in the Navajo Nation Council, enacting COVID-19 vaccination requirements for all Navajo Nation government employees, urging all Navajo Nation-owned enterprises, authorities, corporations, and schools, businesses, and other entities operating within the Navajo Nation to promptly adopt COVID-19 vaccination requirements. Legislation is sponsored by Honorable Eugene So, co-sponsored by Honorable Chairman Daniel E. So, and also co-sponsored by Honorable Vice Chair Thomas Walker Jr. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. With that, colleagues, is there a second? Second by Honorable Vice Chair Walker. That, colleagues, any comments, questions on amendment number 1? Is this?
This is Vice Chair Smith.
Okay, I cannot hear on this computer. Who's wanting to speak?
Vice Chair Smith, Chair Dean.
Vice Chair Smith, go ahead. Sorry, I'm having the speaker on the laptop's not working. Vice Chair Smith, floor is yours. On amendment number 1.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the amendment number 1. Shanai, for seconding this. If this is going, it's obviously an emergency. Yes, it is part of the actions of the council. So we were more or less debating whether 2/3 goes first or 2/3 will go second. Where are we at with this again? That's the question, because we do have an emergency too in front of us, 0169-21, but it's not a label that's an emergency. We need to move with 0169-21, and I know that 017821 is going to be a lengthy debate. We're going to be calling health folks, and we're going to be calling in those that are apt to say these are the purposes, these are the reasons, and we're going to possibly even create new laws on this speaker. So my question is this going to be in front of 169-21? Thank you.
Sorry, colleagues, having technical difficulties here at the chambers. To answer your question, Vice Chair Smith, 0178-21 is a simple majority legislation. So that's a new amendment. Since that legislation is going up, that legislation would be actually item number B on the agenda. So if this amendment does pass, item number B would be 0178-21, which means that we would still start off with legislation 169-21, which is the audit. Hope that clarifies your question, Vice Chair Smith. Now, colleagues, is there any other comments or questions at this time?
Speaker, I have one. This is Edmund.
Chairman Yazzie, floor is yours.
Thank you, Speaker, members of the council. On the amendment, President Nez, I believe, already made an executive order on the shots. I don't see if that's the case, and if he did that, then for the executive staff and with all the staff, is it really necessary for this legislation? Is my question. Okay.
I can't even hear him. So what did he say?
He says this legislation necessary since the president's executive order. He's asking.
With that, is anybody on from the Department of Justice? Or I don't know if Legislative Council wants to address this too as well. Let me refer that question over.
Thank you. This is Office of Legislative Counsel. It is our opinion that yes, the legislation is advisable or necessary. Even the president's executive, or the president did issue an executive order mandating vaccines. The order was issued on August 20th. A reading of the code would show that the president's executive order authority extends to the executive branch. The president, and while the president's order executive order attempts to also impose a mandate on the legislative branch, the judicial branch, all enterprises, that is an overextension of the president's authority under executive order authorities. So to capture all employees of the other branches, meaning the legislative and judicial branches, yes, we believe that legislation is necessary. The president's executive order is recognized in the legislation. There is also a key element of the legislation that speaks to how the mandate is to be interpreted as far as the Navajo Preference and Employment Act goes. Thank you, Speaker. Certainly when the legislation comes up, there may be more questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, any other comments, questions at this time on amendment number 1? Any other comments on amendment number 1? It's adding on legislation 0178-21. Going twice. Going 3 times. Let's go to board on amendment number 1.
Honorable Almer Begay.
How about green?
Honorable Almer Begay votes green. Honorable Kealan Begay Jr.
Delegate Keelan votes green. Thank you.
Honorable Kealan Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Paul Begay Jr.
Delegate Paul Begay votes green.
Honorable Paul Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not vote. Honorable Regina Charles Newton. Charles Newton votes green. Honorable Regina Charles Newton votes green. Honorable Amber Canispa Crotty.
Yes, Ishama, Delegate Amber Canispa Crotty, and I vote green. Thank you.
Honorable Amber Canispa Crotty votes green. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr.
I vote green.
Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. votes green. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland did not vote. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona did not vote. Honorable Jamie Henyo.
Halona votes green. I'm sorry.
Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Pernell Halona votes green. Honorable Vince James.
Henyo votes green. Delegate James votes green.
Honorable Vince James votes green. Honorable Jamie Henyo votes green. Honorable Ricky Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez votes green. Thank you.
Honorable Ricky Nez votes green. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater did not vote. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable
Red.
Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. votes red. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. did not vote. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So did not vote. Honorable Charlene So is excused. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So did not vote. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
I vote green.
Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. votes green. Honorable Edison Winika. Honorable Edison Winika.
Green.
Honorable Edison Winika votes green. Honorable Edmund Yazzie.
Red.
Honorable Edmund Yazzie votes red. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair.
I vote green. Thank you.
Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair votes green. Going back up. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not vote. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland. Honorable Mark Freeland did not vote. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater via text votes green. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Okay, so what? Green.
Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. votes green. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So.
Otto So votes green.
Honorable Otto So votes green. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So does not vote. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So. Honorable Eugene So votes green. With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 17 in favor, 2 opposed. Mr. Speaker not voting. Mr. Speaker?
Speaker Freeland, I'm sorry, I lost signal. I vote green.
Mr. Speaker, Honorable Mark Freeland votes green. That, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 18 in favor, 2 opposed. Mr. Speaker, not voting. Mr. Speaker?
Thank you very much. That, 18 in favor. Where's this?
Speaker, if I may,
Speaker not voting. That, colleagues, back to the main motion.
Speaker, may I, for a few seconds?
Honorable Eugene So on the main motion, go ahead, floor is yours. On the agenda.
Well, I'm just gonna resume my spiritual mourning for my late aunt. I believe my co-sponsor would take care of this later. Yeah, so I want to get off the phone. Thank you. If need be, text me. I'll get on when it comes to it.
Thank you. You'll be excused again, Honorable Eugene So. Safe travels. That, colleagues, any other comments, questions on the agenda at this time? Main motion. Going twice. Going 3 times. Let's go to our second reading on our main motion, Mr. Rico.
Thank you, Speaker. Members of the 24th Navajo Council, you have one amendment. Amendment number 1 is to add legislation 0178-21 to the agenda. Mr. Speaker.
Let's vote.
Honorable Elmer Begay.
I'll vote green.
Honorable Elmer Begay votes green. Honorable Kealan Begay Jr.
Delegate Kealan votes green. Thank you.
Honorable Kealan Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Paul Begay Jr.
Delegate Paul McGee votes green.
Honorable Paul Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not vote. Honorable Regina Charles Newton. Charles Newton votes green. Honorable Regina Charles Newton votes green. Honorable Amber Knussbach Crotty.
Shema, this is Delegate Amber Knussbach-Crotty, and I vote green. Thank you.
Honorable Amber Knussbach Crotty votes green. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. votes green. Honorable Mark Freeland.
Green.
Honorable Mark Freeland votes green. Honorable Pernell Halona.
One votes green.
Honorable Pernell Halona votes green. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Vince James.
votes green.
Honorable Vince James.
Delegate James votes green.
Honorable Vince James votes green. Honorable Jamie Henyo votes green. Honorable Ricky Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez votes green.
Honorable Ricky Nez votes green. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater did not vote. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Green.
Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. votes green. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. votes green. Honorable Otto So. Honorable
Green.
Otto So. Honorable Otto So votes green.
I vote green.
Honorable Charlene So is excused. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Eugene So is excused. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
I vote green.
Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. votes green. Honorable Edison Winika. Honorable Edison Winika.
Honorable Edison Unica did not vote. Honorable
I
Edmund
vote
Yazzie.
green.
Honorable Edmund Yazzie.
Green.
Honorable Edmund Yazzie votes green. Honorable Edison Unica votes green. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair.
I vote green. Thank you.
Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair votes green. Going back up, Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable
Delegate
Nathaniel
Brown
Brown.
votes green.
Honorable Nathaniel Brown votes green. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater did not vote. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So does not vote. With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 19 in favor, 0 opposed, and 2 excused. Speaker not voting. Mr. Speaker?
19 in favor, 0 opposed. Speaker not voting, motion carries. Colleagues, we do have an agenda before us. Thank you. With that, with one amendment approved to it. So let's continue on down. Item number 4, reports, we have none. Item number 5, business, old business, none. Item number 6, new business. Item number A, legislation 0169-21, sponsored by Honorable Vice Chair Smith. That, Mr. Rico, if you could read it into the record, and then we'll go to the floor.
Thank you, Speaker. Members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council, tracking number 0169-21, an action relating to the Budget and Finance and Nabakiatik Committees and Navajo Nation Council, accepting the audit report from Moss Adams on the basic financial statements of the Navajo Nation for fiscal year 2020. Sponsored by Honorable Vice Chairman Raymond Smith Jr. You do have 2 committee reports. You have a committee report from the Budget and Finance Committee that recommend a due pass with a no amendment. You also have a committee report from the Nabakiatik Committee that recommends a due pass with 1 amendment. That amendment, that amendment was on page 2, line 3, delete oversight in draft form, and will be augmented by the 2020 Independent Auditor's Report when finalized, and overstrike to replace existing Exhibit A with new Exhibit A. 3, renumber related succeeding paragraph, section, and exhibits as necessary and appropriate. The Office of Legislative Services and the Office of Legislative Counsel, with notice to the sponsor of the legislation, are hereby authorized to make necessary or to make technical edits to this legislation as necessary and appropriate to correct grammatical and or scrivener's errors, to correct numerical errors, so long as such edits effectuate the committee's intent in approving this legislation. This amendment shall supersede inconsistent language contained in any other committee amendment which shall be conform to the intent or language of this amendment. Per Navajo Nation Council Rules of Order Rule 9, legislation has been read into the record by electronic voice recording. This legislation will be taken over to the Office of the President and Vice President. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. That, colleagues, on legislation 0169-21, is there a motion?
Delegate Rick Nez. Second, Halona.
Chairman Nez. Second by Honorable Halana. That legislation for correction, colleagues, this final authority is here at Navajo Nation Council. This doesn't need to go across the street. That, Vice Chair Smith, you have 20 minutes on the board.
Thank you, Speaker. Navajo Nation Council. Legislation number 0169-21 is in front of us. Here na shkeda no senigi kode sadahoni dahini tasos di kode da penyegi eya audit the nenigi enas endel ka kode Moss Adams the nenigi financial statements that ko yalsan elegi ko ado bunach ha din dot sosto ha uppa ben yegi ha comprehensive budget that the nenegi set ko the Navajo Nation Council also na nishidai lago do di set dot sosto ben yegi ko yalsan elegi FY 2022 that the nenegi ko na onka shinandada no klinigi dibnach ha dot sosto ha wikidos nido or that hitas sozigi aida nabik iat hit amendment eliado nach ha did ad australia ko naidi kichi be das be hodlodo in hinaidi kithodlodo ben nach ha did independent audit report that the nenigi ado shinandada no klinigi ado das no sagi klasi ya ko anaha hina. Every year we have an audit called it's imperative that it's due this Friday. So that's why we're having a special NABI and a special council session. Audit report. Moss Adams independent audit that lagi is for the purposes of the Appropriations Act, even that's because ani without beats. So kodanos and shinandada no linigi ado da shinandada Vice Chair Smith I'm the Vice Chair for the Budget and Finance ko di ko the sana with ahin hitasit soziki. It went through Budget and Finance Committee with no amendments. Ado na bigiyat hi hanidia benda amendment elia. Now we have the final audit. So we have everything in order. So the and I do have my agents with me. We have Acting Controller Elizabeth Begay and also Accounting Manager Robert Willie, and also the Moss Adams, Tasha, and Mr. Luke Meyer. Ryan, we have him as our agents this afternoon. I'd like to turn the floor over to the controller to set the stage on where we're going with this. Then after that, we'll turn it over to Moss Adams pertaining to the audit and introduction of who they are and where they're from and what kind of audit they're doing and why the audit is needed and what the purpose of the audit. I don't that will be turn the floor back over to Speaker for Navajo Nation Council for any questions that may arise from the 2020 audit. So at this point in time, I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Ms. Begay. Ms. Begay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair Smith, for sponsoring this legislation. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Navajo Nation Council. As mandated by Navajo Nation law under the Appropriations Act, we are here to present the financial statement audit of the Navajo Nation for fiscal year 2020. And we are required to present this to the council so that we will be in compliance with our external reporting, as well as with the Navajo Nation bondholders. In addition to that, this is a requirement in order for the Navajo Nation Council to start the deliberation of the proposed fiscal year 2022 comprehensive budget. Also with me, as Vice Chair Smith mentioned, is Robert Willie and Moss Adams auditors. This will be their second year to do the audit of the Navajo Nation. They did the audit back in fiscal year 2019. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ryan Lukemeyer and Tasha Rep. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Smith and Interim Controller Begay. And thank you to Speaker Damon and the council delegates and guests. My name is Tasha Rep, and I am a partner with Moss Adams. Moss Adams is the 14th largest public accounting firm in the country, and we have one of the largest tribal government practices across the US. We have been working with Indian nations for more than 40 years. I myself have been working for Moss Adams for over 25 years now, and spent all of that time working with other Indian nations across the country, and happy to have been able to work for the Navajo Nation for the last 2 years. I also am myself a citizen of the Samish Indian Nation. I have with me and my team, Ryan Lukemeyer, the senior manager that is responsible for overseeing much of the day-to-day operations of the nation's audit. Ryan, can you briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Tasha, and thanks, delegates and members of council. My name is Ryan Lukemeyer. I'm very pleased to be speaking with you today. And I do want to note it's been incredible to work with your team. Everybody from management and your programs have been very helpful during the audit process. I've been working with tribes for over 20 years now across the country with Moss Adams since 2008. So really happy to be here and excited to present these results to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So as it was indicated, the final financial statements for the Navajo Nation for the year ended September 30th, 2020 have been issued and finalized as of yesterday. Those financial statements are required to meet multiple purposes for internal purposes of the nation, but also to meet bond covenant requirements that are required under your bond agreements and required annually to submit to the federal government as a result of the federal grant and contract funding that the nation receives annually. These financial statements are typically issued in June of each year. However, due to the COVID public health emergency, the federal government postponed the deadline that requires audits to typically be done by June 30th. That deadline was actually extended this year to December 31st of 2021. So the nation is still issuing their financial statements well in advance of that federal requirement. But as discussed earlier, the bonds that the tribe holds also require you to submit the financial statements to the bondholders. Those are normally due by June 30th, but those bond covenants do allow for a 60-day grace period, meaning that the nation will still be in compliance as long as those financial statements are issued by the end of August. One of the things that I think it's important to remind everybody is that the financial statements themselves are drafted and the responsibility of management. Our responsibility as auditors is to perform audit procedures over those financial statements to determine that the financial statements are materially correct and that all the appropriate presentation and disclosures are included. I will refer you to the exhibit that's an attachment to this legislation. The first part of that attachment in the financial statements covers our audit opinion on the financial statements. For those of you who are looking at it electronically, it is on pages 4 to 7 of the PDF document. And for those of you that have hard copies of the financial statements, it's on the printed pages 1 through 4. I'm happy to report that our opinion on the financial statements is an unmodified or clean opinion, so that after all the work that was performed, all the information that was provided by OFC, OMB, the departments and programs, we were able to complete our audit procedures and concluded that the financial statements are materially correct. I will point out in that audit opinion that there is one segment of the financial statements where it indicates there is an adverse opinion. This is not something new. The Navajo Nation has elected for many years to exclude the nation's legally separate component units from the financial statements that are issued. So the legally separate component units would be things like the Navajo Gaming Enterprise. So just for those excluded entities, that is the only piece that that adverse opinion showing up in the financial statements is covering. And again, that language is consistent with how it has been presented for several years. Moving through the financial statements themselves that were drafted by management are on pages 8 through 78 of that PDF document, or pages 5 through 74 of the hard copy. That provides you all of the detailed information of what we audited. It provides information on the balance sheet, the assets and the liabilities of the nation, as well as the revenues and outflows that the nation had during the year under audit. The next section of the financial statements really starts to focus on the other piece of the audit that we perform. So in addition to performing audit procedures to determine that the financial statements are materially correct, because of the significant federal funding the nation receives, we're also required to issue reports under the Single Audit Act or uniform guidance on the nation's grant compliance. Those schedules start on page 79 of the PDF and page 75 of the hard copy financial statements. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Ryan Lukemeyer, to talk through the results of our grant compliance audits and go over the findings.
Thank you, Tasha. I'd like to recommend that on the exhibit in the legislation, I'm on, if you're simply looking at the electronic version, it's page 85, or the hard copy version is page 82 of the audit report. That lists out the 15 major programs that we audited in 2020. And then this audit is really, regulated significantly by the federal government. So they provide, guidelines and various calculations to determine which programs to audit. So this page really lists out those programs and then our opinion over those particular programs. And so,
Vice Chair Smith, hold on. Vice Chair Smith, this is Speaker Damon. You had Madam Controller and Ms. Rep as your agents. You're only allowed 2 agents.
Thank you, Speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Therefore, I'll have Mr. Ryan Adams, or Brian, could you please let Tasha just be the agent for now? I appreciate it. Since there is a council rule on that, Speaker, I'll go ahead and refer this back to Tasha.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. As Ryan was indicating on page 85 of the PDF and page 82 of the hard copy financial statements, that lists all of the federal programs that were required to be audited under the Single Audit Act this year. There were 15 of those programs that were required to be audited. You'll see in the table presented that we are required to provide an opinion on each of those programs, and that opinion is determinative of the audit procedures we perform and whether we believe the program is in material compliance with all applicable grant requirements that the federal government requires us to audit. I will point out that they do not have us audit, thankfully, all applicable requirements, but that they give us a specific list for most of these programs on where they would like us as auditors to focus our time. You'll see here that for 9 of the 15 programs we audited, we had a unmodified or clean opinion, meaning that we had no findings of noncompliance relative to those 9 programs, and that we determined that they were in material compliance with the applicable compliance requirements. There were 6 programs for which we identified compliance audit findings, and those findings resulted in a qualified opinion on compliance for those 6 programs. The next set of detailed information in the financial statements on the next page, so starting with page 86 of the PDF and 83 of the hard copy, is the detailed audit findings that we had during the audit. The first 2 audit findings relate to internal control matters over the financial statements as a whole. The first was related to the process that we undertook in testing the collectability of grant receivables. We did identify a small amount of errors, and because we selected a sample of those balances, the audit standards require that we extrapolate that to the entire population. The next finding on the next page was related to information technology controls. This finding is a finding that was included in the prior year audit, and although there were some corrective actions made during the year, there are still some matters to be addressed to improve the nation's information technology controls. The next section of findings that starts on page 89 of the PDF or page 86 of the hard copy is the detail of the findings related to grant compliance. Again, we had 6 programs that had findings over grant compliance. The first was related to some eligibility items that we identified during our testing of the nation's diabetes program. The next finding was related to some eligibility issues related to the nation's food distribution program. Finding 2020-005 was related to an internal control matter only. It did not result in any non-compliance, but it was related to the nation's aid to tribal government programs, and more specifically about the COVID-19 burial assistance program that the nation created during the pandemic. Finding 2020-006 is related to an earmarking requirement related to the Child Care Development Fund cluster. The next finding, 2020-007, was related to eligibility for the nation's Services to Indian Children, Elderly, and Families program under the Division of Social Services. And the next finding was related to a special test and provision around a requirement that the federal government has to pay prevailing wage rates for certain construction type contracts relative to the nation's water resources on Indian lands program. And the final finding that we had was related to allowable costs for the Department of Treasury Coronavirus Relief Fund. Specifically on that program, there were an individual's holiday pay was charged to the program where the individual was not allowed under the CARES Act requirements to have been charged during that time period. That completes the portion of the financial statements that is covered under our report. The final documents included in the nation's financial statements, starting on page 102 of the PDF or 99 of the hard copy, is the summary schedule of prior audit findings that was prepared by management that talks about whether the prior audit findings were resolved. I am happy to report there that many of the prior audit findings that were reported in 2019 have been resolved, but there were still a few that ultimately were repeated. And then the next document is the corrective action plan that management prepared in response to the current year findings. That concludes the review of the final financial statements that have been issued. And again, I want to take the opportunity to again thank all of the Navajo Nation staff and employees that assisted us during the audit. I know that going through an audit during a pandemic is not easy, and we very much appreciate the effort that was provided in being responsive to us.
Thank you, Tasha. That concludes our presentation, Speaker. We're here for any questions that may be posed by the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank
Yes.
you. It was right on the time. That was right on the nose there for the time. With that, colleagues, let me go ahead and go to the floor. We do have legislation 0169-21. And at this time, I don't have anybody in the queue. Any comments, questions?
Speaker, this is Delegate Charles Newton.
Madam Chair, floor is
Speaker
yours.
Callan,
Honorable Keon Begay, you are in the queue.
Sorry about that, Speaker. Thank you for the presentation. I'm looking at your 9 findings, and specifically on page 83, you state for the financial statement findings that the grant receivable balances should be monitored on at least a semi-annual basis to ensure amounts reported are accurate and collectible. I'd like to know, how do we currently monitor our grants? I'm assuming it's not on a semi-annual basis, otherwise it wouldn't be within the findings. My second question is pertaining to page 84 of the hard copy. I just want to remind my colleagues that one of the findings in here does include our information technology. Perhaps we can understand and also remember that the lack of resources out of IT that's causing some concerns within this audit, that we remember this during budget, because our IT department always comes before us regarding issues that are happening here on the nation, and we don't ever increase their budget as far as I know, but I think we do need to per the audit findings here. And I specifically point to page 84 under the auditor's recommendation 1, where it states this will ensure that the nation is not providing too much access privilege to any employee that might in turn be used either intentionally or unintentionally to modify data within the system. And then page 85, on the bottom of the page, it does say that the controller of the Navajo Nation is responsible to ensure the planned corrective action is fully achieved by September 30th. I'd like to get a timeline or an update on when or whether this will be completed by the September 30th, 2021 deadline. I reserve the rest of my time, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Reserve your time at 3 minutes and 9 seconds. That moving on down, Honorable Keon Begay, floor is yours, and then I'll go back to the sponsor for a response.
Speaker, the first question, I'd like to request the sponsor to go back and do an overall explanation of the Navajo Nation financial dollar figures. That's my request to the presenter from the accounting firm. Speaker, reserve the rest of my time.
Reserve your time at 4 minutes and 39 seconds. Pat, I'll go back to you, Honorable Vice Chair Smith. Response.
Well, thank you, Speaker, Navajo Nation Council, 24th Navajo Nation Council, and those that are listening on board. Okay, allow for those questions. For the question that was posed by Honorable Chair Eugenia Charles Newton, there's page 83 and page 84 and part of the 9 findings. I'll turn that floor over to Acting Controller Elizabeth Begay, and also the question for Honorable Key Allen Begay. I will turn that to the Controller, Acting Controller, to Speaker. They have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Navajo Nation Council. The question from Madam Chair about the first finding on page 83 regarding the grants receivable. Yeah, there is an issue about not reconciling grants receivable timely. And with that, we provided a corrective action plan that the annual review will be completed, covering all the balances itemized by funding agency. This deficiency was caused primarily due to the pandemic and the limited staffing available at that time at the Office of the Controller. But moving forward, we will implement this corrective action plan by beginning this coming month, September. So that will be implemented for fiscal year 2021 closeout. And for the next finding under the IT, we recognize the limited resources that we have. And the issue mainly is that our FMIS system office does not get the personal action forms from programs in a timely manner. But we want to emphasize that Navajo Nation programs, except of course the Office of the Controller, have inquiry access to the FMIS and just the 6B process. They do not have the ability to change the data inputted into the FMIS. Only the Office of the Controller has that authority. Therefore, the security risk is very low for the employees that left the Navajo Nation outside the Office of the Controller to be able to change the data that have been inputted into the FMIS. Nevertheless, we will continue to work on getting the personal action form so that we can remove those terminated employees out of the access to the FMIS. And we will be able to complete this by this fiscal year 2021 with the help of the new system that we are implementing, which is the Sendex ticketing system. And that answers Madam Chair Charles Newton's question. And with regard to Delegate Key Allen Begay, I'll have Moss Adam respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Tasha Rep from Moss Adams. And the question was about going over the actual financial information from the audited financial statements. So again, that information starts on page 8 of the PDF or page 5 of the hard copy financial statements. That first page is referred to as the statement of net position or balance sheet, which shows the nation's total assets, excluding all of the legally separate entities of the nation. And at the end of the year, those total assets exceeded $6.6 billion. It includes information on the nation's liabilities at September 30, 2020, which was about $1.5 billion, and leaves net position of the nation of just over $5 billion. The next page in those financial statements is referred to as the statement of activities, and that provides information by functional department and area of the expenses and the different types of revenues that fund those activities for the nation, showing that expenses of the nation were $588 million. Charges for service type revenue of $181 million, operating grant revenue of $389 million, capital grant revenue and contributions of almost $50 million. And then general revenue and transfers is the bottom section, which again shows other revenue sources that are not specifically externally designated to be used for a particular function. It includes most of the nation's tax revenues and investment revenues, and then a few other special items. The following pages of the financial statements show what are referred to as the governmental departments. So those are the general fund, the grant fund, the permanent fund, and a few other smaller funds. This is providing the same information that is on that first schedule, that first balance sheet I went over. It's just providing it in a little bit more detail, where that first schedule, that statement of net position, only includes the summarized total of governmental activities. And then similarly, starting on page 13 of the PDF and page 10 of the hard copy, this is the more detailed information about the nation's enterprise funds and the nation's internal service funds. So those funds where you're charging other programs or departments for services, and provide some additional detail on those. But those are also included in that first set of financial statements. The next set of financial statements that's included is the fiduciary fund financial statements, which starts on page 17 of the PDF or page 14 of the hard copy. Excuse me, on the page ahead, it's page 16 of the PDF and page 13 of the hard copy. That includes the information about other assets that the nation is responsible for, but that is not available directly for the nation's use. So that includes information on the nation's pension trust funds and other private purpose trust funds. And then the bulk of the rest of the financial statements is the notes to the financial statements, which provides additional detail about certain transactions that may have occurred during the year or certain account balances. So it would include detailed information on some of the makeup of the nation's investments, as well as other disclosures. So hopefully that gives you enough of an overview of that section of the financial statements. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tasha Rep, for that, and also Acting Controller Ms. Begay. We'll turn the floor back over to the speaker for additional questions.
Thank you with that. Thank you. With that, colleagues, we'll go back to the floor. I don't have anybody else in the queue at this time. Any comments, questions?
Reserve time.
If not, let me go back to reserve time. We have Madam Chair Charles Newton, 3 minutes and 9 seconds.
I reserve my time, Speaker.
Reserve your time at 3 minutes, 8 seconds. Moving on down, Honorable Keon Begay, 4 minutes, 39 seconds.
Speaker, for the 24th Navajo Nation Council, Appreciate the response. There's several areas that I like to get more information. When you mentioned the for burial assistant, can you be more specific in how is it determined that fundings were not administered properly? Although the technology control, can you be more specific of what is it that the Navajo Nation is doing that is where this particular issue considered as a finding? And then the water resource, can you be more specific in what area and the amount of dollars that is being looked at, that's being at the finding? So, I think this is the time. This is an overall Navajo Nation funding. Oh, huge at Okwaki peso to Hajochos in the Hanope Sate. How is the external firm at Dutch is looking at it? And that will be one of my last questions, Donde, is that how much of this particular funding being administered by the Navajo Nation government, that there's a lot of misuse funding. Because minors.
Honorable Keon Begay, you're cutting in and out. We stopped your time. Stop your time at 2 minutes and 44 seconds, Shay. Any other comments, questions, colleagues? Let me go back to Vice Chair. Honorable Keon Begay, are you on the line for a response? Do you see him on the tab? I don't see him on there. He was.
Speaker Keon's back.
Hey, Honorable Keon Begay. We lost you.
Chairman, I know. I'm not sure where I lost you guys. But that's the three main question I wanted to ask first. I reserve the rest of my time, Speaker.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back to Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Speaker, and 24th Navajo Nation Council. There's three questions that were posed in that question that you asked. So I do have my agents with me, and I'll turn the floor directly over to Moss Adams, Tasha Rip. There's three questions that were posed by Honorable Mr. Begay. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I'll start with the question about the burial assistance and more detail and what type of finding is being reported there. So that was a new program, again, related to the nation's COVID-19 burial assistance program that was created to help families who had loved ones who passed as a result of the pandemic this past year. There were 142 participant files for families that received assistance under that program. From those 142 files, we selected a sample of 20 of those files. And what we found during our testing was that although all of the files had ultimately gone through the right approval process, that there were some of those files where the final approval sign-offs had not been documented and dated until after the check had already been distributed. And so we did not consider this finding to be a non-compliance matter. It did not result in any question cost to the program, but we are also required to report findings relative to internal controls over compliance. And because the internal control was not operating effectively, where all sign-offs were performed and completed prior to the distribution of the payment, it resulted in reporting of this finding. As it relates to the water resources grant, again, when the certain programs of the nation require that when you enter into contracts for construction type activities, that the nation is required to follow Davis-Bacon requirements, which includes obtaining certified payroll reports from those contractors and reviewing those certified payroll reports. What we found during our audit testing of those contracts was that the certified payroll reports had not been reviewed until after the project was done. Relative to the IT finding, I will say again that this finding is a repeat finding from prior years, that there were some corrective actions that were taken relative to the prior year finding. Switching to the correct page. So wait just 1 second for me to catch up with my screen. So there are a couple of things that we think are important controls overall relative to IT controls. One is that there's a documented review of user access roles to ensure that permissions in the accounting system and other applications are appropriate. Two, as was discussed earlier, there were issues with terminated employees not being removed timely from the accounting system. And three, as a process, it is important to have a change management policy in place and document what controls are in place for people to change underlying databases or software to ensure that those are only done when approved, and that policy is again also annually monitored and updated to identify any new risks. As we all know, there are more and more IT risks every year, and so it's an important step of having a good IT controls to make sure you are consistently reevaluating if something new needs to be updated or addressed. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tasha, for that response back to Honorable T. Allen Begay. Speaker, at this point in time, we'll turn the time back over to you.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, go back to the floor. I don't have anybody in the queue at this time. Is there any further comments or questions? No one is texted in. We go back to reserve time. Madam Chair, Charles Newton with 3 minutes, 8 seconds.
Thank you, Speaker. I do have a question. On page 95, you did go through the findings pertaining to the Davis-Bacon wages. I know that this question did come up when we did have a particular enterprise before this council. Correct me if I'm reading this incorrectly, but it sounds as if the contractor was paid federal funds, which means that our Navajo employees should have been paid the Davis-Bacon wages under the Davis-Bacon Act. However, the report does seem to indicate that the Navajo employee or the Navajo contractor didn't implement the Davis-Bacon wages, which means a lot of our Navajo people really missed out on funds that they should have received. My question is, where did that money go if it didn't go into the pockets of our Navajo employees? I reserve the rest of my time.
Hey, thank you. That is every time at 2 minutes, 17 seconds. Honorable Keelan McGay, 2 minutes and 44 seconds.
Speaker, I'd like to ask the firm if they were told not to address any other areas that are in litigation or are being addressed by the Department of Justice. If there was anything that they were told not to review. That's the first question. The second question is that what is the actual scope of work that was being told of the firm to do the overall Navajo Nation? If we could get a copy of the contract, the scope of work that they're asked to do. So that's my two more questions. Speaker, reserve the rest of my time.
That's 2 minutes and 5 seconds. Let me go back to sponsor Vice Chair Smith. Floor is yours for response.
Thank you, Speaker. Navajo Nation Council, reference to the legislation and the questions that are posed. These are very good questions, and I'm sure that these questions are in the back of our minds as we are legislatures of the Navajo Nation Council, and especially BNF, as we had the work session. At this point in time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Tasha in reference to Honorable Chair Eugene Charles Newton's question, and also Honorable Key Allen Begay's question that were posed. Speaker, I'd like to turn the floor over at this point in time to Tasha. Rep. Tasha, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. I'll start with the first question that was posed, which was about the Davis-Bacon prevailing wages. And I think there's two important things to clarify there. One is that I want to clarify that the contract that was reviewed was not one of the component units of the Navajo Nation. It was an external unrelated contractor. And that the finding is not asserting that prevailing wages weren't paid, but that the nation was not monitoring that timely. The audit standards actually don't require us to test what wages were ultimately paid. They just require us to test that you have a process in place to monitor those wages. For the second question about whether we were asked not to disclose or look at anything as it relates to our audit, we had very open access to everybody. We were not provided any information that we requested during the audit process. With any audit, when there are allegations and concerns that are made aware to our attention, we do have a requirement under the audit standards to evaluate whether we think those could potentially have a material impact on the overall financial statements. And so as a result of that, we did perform a number of inquiries of the DOJ, Attorney General, OOC, and members of the Budget and Finance Committee about what was going on, so we could determine if there were any material impacts to the financial statement period that we were auditing. As a result of the additional procedures, we determined that the financial statements were materially correct. There were several items that were brought to our attention during our interviews but the expenditures related to those items were not expenditures that were incurred prior to September 30, 2020. Many of those items were outside the scope of our audit, so they did not have a material impact during our audit period. We also reviewed documents and transaction support relative to certain aspects of those matters that were brought to our attention. Thank you.
If we can provide a contact.
Thank you very much, Tasha Rep, for the answers to Honorable Chairman Eugenia Newton and also Honorable Key Allen Begay. At this point in time, Speaker, we'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you. That, colleagues, let me go back to the floor. We do have Honorable Vice Chair Slater in the queue. Honorable Slater, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you to the legislation sponsor and the presenters. I'm looking at 2020-006, and it says for the 15% administrative cap, and then goes on from there. On the first one, it talks about exceeding the administrative cap by a little over $1 million, but the justification that's provided is for a 2% IDC increase, and I don't see how those two numbers correspond. I wonder if that applies to the second part of that on the 15% cap. And then with the quality of care remarks, can you explain what the corrective action plan is going to be there? Because again, I'm not 100% sure how the response is going to take place. And Speaker, I'll reserve the rest of my time.
That, Honorable Slater, 4 minutes, 14 seconds. Colleagues, any other comments and questions? Now let me go back to reserve time. Madam Chair, Charles Newton, 2 minutes, 17 seconds.
I reserve my time.
2 minutes, 16 seconds. That, moving on down, Honorable Keon Begay, 2 minutes and 5 seconds.
Speaker, the overall fund management of the Navajo Nation, I'd like to hear their point of view of how they have been auditing and going through the financial system. Question one. Have they, question two, have they making any effort to look into the local 110 chapter financial system? That's the second question. And then how do we go about including auditing the enterprises? That's question three. Chairman, reserve my time.
Hey, I'm Keon Begay, 1 minute, 40 seconds. We go back to the sponsor for response. Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you again, colleagues of the Navajo Nation Council, for these questions, Vice Chair Slater and also Honorable Key Allen Begay. At this point in time, these questions will be turned over to my agents. Tasha Rep, I'll turn the floor over to you for those two questions that are three questions that were posed by the Honorable Council delegates of the Navajo Nation. Tasha.
Yes, thank you, sir. Relative to the administrative cap finding, indirect costs are considered an administrative cost. So any indirect costs that are allocated to the program fall within the limitations of the administrative cap. And of the administrative costs that were charged to the program, indirect is the largest. And so when there's a significant increase in the nation's indirect cost rate, it impacts the ability to fund other administrative costs or be at risk of exceeding that 15% administrative cap. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit the relationship between indirect and the administrative cap there. There was also a question about corrective action that I would prefer to refer to OOC, but I will address the other questions. One was asking about the audit of the overall financial systems of the nation. And yes, so audit standards that our audit is performed under require us to perform an assessment of the design of the nation's controls and to perform risk assessments to determine what areas of the audit we believe are riskier and warrant more audit attention during the audit versus those that are less risky. We also are allowed under the audit standards to test the operating effectiveness of some of the nation's controls. So when we look at the design of the controls and we think the design should support an effective control environment, we do then perform tests of internal controls. So over cash receipts, over disbursement processing, over payroll processes, are a large part of the audit. And so the systems are included within the scope of our audit where we have determined that it is effective for us to rely on those systems. The second part of the question, I didn't catch all of the detail, but it was in reference to the chapters. The chapters are not part of the scope of this audit engagement, so I don't have anything to add there. The third question was about whether the enterprises could be included in the scope of the audit. That's a decision for the nation's legislative bodies, executive branches, and management to determine. They're under reporting standards. You absolutely have the ability to include all of your legally separate entities as part of the overall financial statements, but the nation has not historically elected to do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tasha, for those answers for our honorable delegates that pose questions. At this point in time, Speaker, we'll turn the floor back over for additional questions. You have the floor.
Office of the Controller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Navajo Nation Council, and Delegate Slater question about the corrective action plan for the Division of Social Services regarding this finding. Generally, the program has to monitor the implementation of the corrective action plan, and the Office of Management and Budget as well gets a copy of the corrective action plan, and they monitor the implementation of the corrective action plan. And during the budget hearing, they report to the council the status of that corrective action plan. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Begay, for that reply. Turn the floor back over to Speaker Damon.
Thank you. That, colleagues, so we go back to the floor. Again, I don't have anybody in the queue at this time. I don't have no one texting in. Any comments or questions, colleagues, before I go back to reserve time?
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Otto So.
can I move forward to cease debate? Thank you. That's my motion.
Honorable, the best way I can do this is that, at this time, Honorable Otto, so we haven't even been discussing this legislation. Well, it's going to be in almost an hour. And right now I have only 3 individuals with reserved time. Let me ask if they're going to waive their time, if they want to waive their time. Madam Chair, Charles Newman, you want to waive your time? 2 minutes, 16 seconds.
Speaker, it's my fiduciary duty to ask questions regarding the audit. So no, I will not waive my time.
Hey, with that, Honorable Otto, so I can't accept your cease debate at this time. There's not enough. We haven't had a full debate on this legislation. 0169-21. I would say if we were over 2 hours on this, going back on reserve time continuously, then we would. But at this time, Honorable Otto, so I can't accept your cease debate. Madam Chair, Charles Newman,
Okay,
going
thank
back.
you.
Thank you. With that, 2 minutes, 16 seconds.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to turn to page 5, if I can get an explanation on what deferred outflows is. And then on page 42, if you can explain to me the deficit involving the 4th of July celebration and the air transportation fund. I reserve my time.
2 minutes and 2 seconds. That, Honorable Keon Begay, 1 minute, 40 seconds.
Speaker, point of privilege.
Point of privilege.
Yes, Speaker, without using my time.
Honorable Keon Begay.
Speaker, point of privilege.
Yes, I recognize you.
I'd like to request through the point of privilege, the actual scope of work of the current audit firm and the previous CKPM their scope of work, in documents, and probably the rest of the council wants to see it. That's my point of privilege, Speaker.
Honorable Keon Begay, you mean KPMG? The scope of work, I reach out to Madam Controller, Mr. Willie. If you get the scope of work for the advertisement, I guess that was in the contract, the initial contract for Moss Adams. And then also the former contract that we had with KPMG. I think that's who Honorable Keon Begay is referring to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Navajo Nation Council, and Delegate Kealan Begay. Yes, we will provide that as soon as we find the contract for KPMG, and for Moss Adams, we have that readily available, and we can email them to the Navajo Nation Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If you send that over, as soon as you send it over, we'll send it out, colleagues. Or as soon as we reach it and receive it, we'll send it out. With that, let me go back to you, Honorable Keon Begay, 1 minute, 40 seconds on your reserve time. Honorable Keon Begay. Honorable Keon Begay going 3 times. That, moving on down, Vice Chair Slater. 4 minutes and 14 seconds on reserve time.
Speaker, I'll reserve my time.
Reserve your time at 4 minutes, 13 seconds. That, Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair, floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, speakers and colleagues, 24 councilmen. I just have a questions about under the Navajo Nation Division of Social Services and part of Child Care and Development. There's one area that I don't know if this is very serious, but I had a question. The question is about a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $1,772,049, which exceeded the administrative cap. How serious is this anyway? This is a big money that they went over the budget. And then my question is to the auditors, Moss Adam. Overall, how much do we have a serious? How bad are we, and what percentage are we, and is it just a good less maybe out of funding based on your audit? And that's my questions, Speaker, and to my two sponsor, Chairman, Vice Chairman Smith. I'll save my time. Thank you. Yeah.
Reserve time at 3 minutes, 46 seconds. We go back to Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Speaker and Navajo Nation Council, 24th Bishmasan. Yes, there is questions posed, and these questions are viable. Therefore, I will turn the floor over to Moss Adams, preferably Tasha, to answer those questions that were posed by Honorable Chair Eugenia Charles Newton and also Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Tasha, you have the floor.
Thank you. So the first question I'll address is the question about page 5 of the hard copy of the financial statements, which is page 8 of the PDF. And that was a question related to talking about deferred inflows of resources and deferred outflows of resources. Those are items that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. They are very similar to assets or liabilities in that they are transactions that are incurred during a year that benefit a future year. So an example of that and what is presented in the nation's financial statements is those related to pensions. So as you contribute to a pension plan, there's a way to account for the contributions, but what gets reported in the nation's financial statements is based on the actuarial projections of what may get paid out in the future, which could differ from the amounts that you've contributed to date. And so the accounting guidance for those timing differences normally results, particularly relative to pensions, in these things that are deferred outflows of resources or deferred inflows of resources. Conceptually, you can think of them deferred outflows as similar to assets and deferred inflows as similar to liabilities, and that they are expected to be expensed or paid out in the future. The other question was about two funds that had deficit fund balances. I apologize, the only one I caught was the 4th of July fund. That fund was not material to the financial statements, so I don't have any particular information, but I did note in the documentation that there was 7,000 of expenses, but no revenues during the year. So as to the cause of the deficit, I will defer to OOC to talk through the cause of the deficit of those two funds. The other question posed was kind of more of a judgment in how the nation's financial results are relative to other tribal governments that we audit. A little perspective, because I think there's two elements to this, right? There's the financial health of the government, and then there's the results of the compliance audit or the audits itself. So I'll start with just one observation on financial health. The thing that I always look to when I'm looking at a government's financial statements is what is its fund balance or net position relative to its total assets, which is still, again, looking at page 5 of the nation's financial statements in the hard copy, or page 8 of the PDF. And again, the nation has 6.6 million in assets, but only 1.4 million, or sorry, billion of liabilities, meaning that the nation has substantial resources set aside to fund future operations. That detail in the net position does talk about what of those assets are restricted by external parties, or what of those assets may have been restricted internally by the nation itself. But having a net position of 5 billion with assets of 6.6 billion would generally be determined to be a healthy position. As it relates to the results of our audits, again, our opinion on the financial statements was unmodified, which is the best it could be. The fact that the nation has an adverse opinion for excluding its legally separate entities is something that we see really commonly across Indian country, and is not something that I would think would be a matter of concern, as long as all of those entities are having their own audits. It does not need to be consolidated into the nation's audit. As it relates to our compliance findings, just again, to put things in perspective and kind of look at the trends over time. Last year, we had 5 uniform guidance findings and 2 financial statement findings. In 2018, there were 7 uniform guidance findings, and that was 2018, and in 2017, there were 10 such findings. So the trend is going down. This year, there is maybe a little bit of an uptick from where it was in the prior year, but there was also a lot of new funding in programs that hadn't been audited as a result of the CARES Act and other funds. I don't think it's unusual to see during periods where there are new programs or significant changes to a program. Those are years where it's not unusual to have findings. We have a very broad mix of clients across our tribal practice. And I would say that the Navajo Nation's results are fairly typical. Most of our tribal clients have some level of findings. And given the number and variety of programs that the nation has, it's not unusual to see audit findings reported from time to time, again, particularly as it relates to new programs or programs that have not been audited as frequently. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha, for that response on behalf of the questions that were posed. At this point in time, Speaker, I'd like to turn the floor over to Madam Acting Controller, Ms. Begay. Ms. Begay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair Smith, Mr. Speaker, members of the Navajo Nation Council, and the question Madam Chair Charles Newton posed about the deficits for the 4th of July celebration fund. The reason for that is just they did not bring enough revenue to cover their expenses that resulted in a deficit for that fund. As far as the air transportation fund, there's a deficit of 3.1 million. And the reason for that is just that the department did not charge enough to cover their expenses. And this is a problem year after year for the air transportation. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair.
Well, thank you, Acting Controller Ms. Begay, for that response and answer. At this point in time, members of the Navajo Nation Council, I'll go ahead and turn the floor back over to Speaker Damon.
Thank you. That, colleagues, let me go ahead and go back. I don't have anybody in the queue at this time. So let me go ahead and go back to reserve time. With that, Madam Chair, Charles Newton, 2 minutes and 2 seconds.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Controller Begay. So back to page 42 regarding the deficit. So is there a deficit for 4th of July celebration at $38,768, or is the deficit at $63,519? And then on page 44, the long-term liabilities, it states that in 2014, the nation drew down $6,300,000. Can I ask what that money was used for? I'm slowly making my way through the audit, so I apologize. I reserve the rest of my time.
Okay, with that, 1 minute and 25 seconds. Moving on down, Honorable Keelan Begay, 1 minute, 40 seconds.
Speaker, reserve time.
1 minute, 39 seconds. Honorable Slater. Honorable Slater, Vice Chair, 4 minutes, 13 seconds.
Thank you, Speaker. I was wondering if Controller Begay could elaborate on the Key Bank. I don't know if it was a loan or a credit facility for upgrading FMIS. I think this is the first I was hearing of it, so I'd just like to learn a little more. I'll reserve the rest of my time, Speaker. Thank you.
4 minutes and 3 seconds. Moving on down, Honorable Yellow Hair, 3 minutes, 46 seconds.
Hello, good afternoon again. This question is going to go to Acting Controller. This is a question pertains to that under a Department of Child Care and Development. They exceeded their overexpense by $1,772,049, but their timeline is up to September 30 to solve the problems. How bad is this one here? Do they have enough money to cover this over expenditures to a acting controller? Beth Begay. I reserve my time. Thank you. Yeah, Speaker.
Hey, reserve your time at 3 minutes flat. That, we go back. Vice Chair Smith, actually, there was questions directly to Madam Controller.
Thank you, Speaker, for the questions that were posed by our council delegates of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Questions were posed to Acting Controller Ms. Begay. I will turn the floor over to Ms. Begay in reference to these questions that were posed. Ms. Begay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair Smith and Speaker and the Navajo Nation Council. The first question, Madam Chair Charles Newton, regarding the deficit. We're trying to pull the financials to determine what caused the deficit, what kind of expense that contributed to the deficit, and we will email them to the Navajo Nation Council as soon as we pull the financials. For the question on Delegate Slater about the Key Bank loan for the FMIS, that's on page 44 of the hard copy. Yeah, based on the report, we will be able to pay this loan on January 1st, 2022. And that loan was created back in 2014. That's a 6.3 million loan. And finally, we will be able to pay it off in 2022, January. And for Delegate Yellow Hair, a question about the child care. If they don't have enough money, then the general fund has to pay for their expenses. And we're looking at their financials again, but based on the audit, they don't have enough money. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Acting Controller of the Navajo Nation.
Put together that financial.
Thank you very much for that reference to the response back to the Honorable Council Delegates of the Navajo Nation. At this point in time, the Speaker, I'll turn the floor back over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you. That, colleagues, is there any other comments or questions on the floor? I don't have anybody else texting in or in the queue, but I do have reserved time. If there's not, I'm gonna go back to reserve time. Madam Chair Charles Newman, 1 minute, 25 seconds.
Reserve my
1 minute, 24 seconds. Moving on down, Honorable Keon Begay, 1 minute, 39 seconds.
Speaker, appreciate the time again. First question, CARES funding. How much of this funding was directly been utilized for the hazard pay? Could you be able to identify and where exactly where these funding been administered? That's question one. Question two, again, going back to the auditing of the enterprises, could you be more specific on that particular response? Speaker, that's my two questions, and reserve the rest of my time.
Every time at 1 minute, 2 seconds. Moving on down, Honorable Slater, 4 minutes and 2 seconds.
I'll reserve my time, Speaker.
4 minutes, 1 second. Moving on down, Honorable Yellow Hair, 3 minutes.
Thank you again, Speaker. My part is on this schedule of findings and questions cost. I have the opportunity to follow up on timeline with those questions and based on audit, and I will review by before September 30. So therefore, I will just yield my time, and by that time, we see what's all the results on the audit. I can look through again, follow up with being the committee members. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Let me go back to Vice Chair Smith for Honorable Keon Begay's questions.
Well, thank you, Speaker, for the opportunity to respond back to Honorable Key Allen Begay regarding the CARES funds and how it was utilized on the hazard pay. And then the second question, I think he was asking to be more specific on the enterprise. And I will turn the floor over to Moss Adams. Tasha, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. The coronavirus relief funds were one of the programs that we audited this year as a major program And in that program, through September 30th, 2020, there was $604,000 of expenditures related to special duty pay or the hazard pay program. We also saw some hazard pay relative to other programs, but I do not have a specific detail of those dollar amounts. But we tested the compliance with the hazard pay policy if a payroll sample in our samples for any other programs had an employee that was receiving hazard pay during the pay period that we selected in our sample. Relative to the audit of the enterprises, it is really up to each government to determine the scope of their audit. Because many of the nation's enterprises are legally separate component units, typically, but not always, typically, that means that they have a separate board, and that board often oversees those audits. Sometimes the nation's branches might also obtain copies of those audits, but again, that is unique to the facts and circumstances of every nation. So I don't have more information on why the nation has elected not to include those component units as part of its overall financial statements, other than to again reiterate that this is fairly common among other tribes that we work with, to exclude those financial statements from the government's financial statements. One big reason that a number of tribes elect to exclude that business information from their financial statements is that these financial statements are required to be made publicly available for purposes of the single audit, where some tribes have determined that their business audits are not subject to the same public disclosure requirements. But again, that varies a lot from tribe to tribe. So I would defer on answering the why relative to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Moss Adams, Tasha Rip, for the response on the questions that were posed. Speaker, we'll turn the floor back over to you for additional questions from the Navajo Nation Council.
Thank you very much. That, colleagues, we're back on the main motion. And if you're just joining us, we are on legislation 0169-21. It's a legislation that's referring to the Navajo Nation's annual audit. And what we're doing is that we're accepting that audit. It's sponsored by Honorable Vice Chair Smith. We do have a motion on the floor is by Honorable Chairman Nez, second by Honorable Halona. I don't have anybody in the queue at this time, but I do have individuals still with reserved time. So I'm going back to reserved time. That, Madam Chair, Charles Newton, 1 minute, 24 seconds.
Thank you, Speaker. If I can get some help, Speaker, on the original legislation regarding the draft, on page 6, there was information regarding the tribal ranch, the veterinary medical sales fund, and the Colorado ranch. I can't seem to find that on the official audit that we have. So if I can get some assistance, I reserve the rest of my time.
One minute. Reserve your time. What page are you looking at, Madam Chair?
Thank you, Speaker. I technically should have just called a point of order, but I'm looking at the draft legislation, page 6, under business type activities. It states there's like a few activities that are posted, but I can't find that on the actual audit. So if I can just get some help on that.
Okay. We figured that one out. All right. That. We go to Honorable Keon Begay with 1 minute and 2 seconds left, Shay, on your reserve time.
Speaker, reserve time.
Honorable Keon Begay reserves time at 1 minute and 1 second. Honorable Slater, 4 minutes and 1 second on reserve time. Honorable Slater.
Thank you, Speaker. I can't find the page right now. I just lost it. But I think it says that the total value of the nation's assets is about $7 billion. And I was wondering if the controller can provide a breakdown of that and a little more elaboration, and then also explain what could potentially be investable in securities that could increase the amount that we use to supplement the annual fiscal year budget. We just have a lot of trust funds, and it seems like by parceling out and breaking up for all these different constituencies, we don't really maximize the return back to our people. And we create different classes of special interests that don't end up harmonizing all the services we should be delivering from the government. So I'll reserve the rest of my time. Thank you, Speaker.
Reserve time at 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Let me go back to Vice Chair Smith.
Agushi, here, last speaker, Nana, on the legislation 0169-21 regarding the questions that were posed by Chairwoman Eugenia Charles Newton on the draft, and also the question on Vice Chair Slater regarding the total assets of the Navajo Nation and the amount and the breakdown. At this point in time, Speaker, I'll turn the floor over to Moss Adams for Honorable Chair Eugenia and Charles Newton's question. Moss Adams, Tasha, Rep, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. That page of the financial statements in the final package is page 9 of the PDF, or page 6 of the bound copy. And in the final version, the tribal ranch and the Colorado ranch are both still reported. There's been no change in that schedule for the statement of activities between the two. Hopefully identifying those page numbers helps you locate it. There is also additional information on both of the ranch's detailed activities in the supplementary combining schedules of the nation. Those start on page 70 of the PDF and page 67 of the hard copy, where there is more detail on the nation's enterprise funds, including additional detail on the tribal ranch and the Colorado ranch. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha, for that response and answer. At this point in time, I'd like to turn the floor over for the question that was posed by Vice Chair Slater to acting OOC. Ms. Begay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Mr. Speaker, Navajo Nation Council, and Delegate Slater. The question about the breakdown of that $7 billion. I have the hard copy. You can see that on page 31. And of that $7 billion, $1 billion is cash, including money market accounts and certificate of deposits. And that's in-house investments that OOC is managing. And the rest, those are the investments that our money managers is managing. Mainly those are the bonds and equity investment, which is the stocks And there's also the different asset class, and that is broken down. For example, there's the government and federal agency obligations, that's 1.4 billion. There's the municipal bonds of 3.9 million, corporate bonds of 954 million. And also there's the corporate obligations of 85 million. Then marketable securities, this is mostly the equities, stocks, 2.6 billion. There's the mutual funds of 335 million. There's the real estate funds, 385 million, and the high yield fixed income funds of 198 million. So that totaled to 7 billion. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Begay, in reference to the breakdown of the answer, and also from Tasha. At this point in time, Speaker, I'd like to turn the floor over for remaining questions that will be posed for this audit here. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. That, colleagues, let me go ahead and go back to the floor. Again, there's no one in the queue or texting in. So, colleagues, I have three of our colleagues who have reserved time remaining. So let me go back to them, and then we can go from there. With that, Madam Chair, Charles Newton, 1 minute on reserve time.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to refer to page 83 again. I know I asked questions about the grants already, but Speaker, a few weeks ago, we did receive, I believe it was from OMB, a breakdown of how much money the Navajo Nation returns back to the federal government and to the state government, because we, for various reasons. Based on the audit information here, it states that the nation is, we have, our internal controls are not adequate at this time. However, per the information, it's saying it's as a result of COVID. But based on the document that was sent to us on how much money the Navajo Nation returns back to the federal government and to the state government, from 2008, I understand the monitoring began up to today, or up to this year. So my question is, how much money has the Navajo Nation returned back to the state and federal government? Thank you, Speaker.
That, on down. Honorable Keon Begay. 1 minute and 1 second.
Speaker, two quick questions again. On page 35, can you elaborate more on the foreign currency risk? Does the Navajo Nation have any fund being, invest in foreign country? That's one question. And then on the page 35, it talks about the 5.5 million part security for the hospitality enterprise. Can you elaborate more on that one? Reserve my time.
32 seconds. Moving on down, Vice Chair Slater.
I'll reserve my time, Speaker.
3 minutes, 7 seconds. Okay, with that, let me go back to Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, my agents are available for these questions that were posed, and I will go ahead and turn the floor over to Madam Controller Acting. Ms. Begay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Mr. Speaker, Navajo Nation Council. Madam Chair Charles Newton, question about that memo that we sent to the council. that was dated July 26, 2021. And that listed those that the external funds budget report. And based on that memo, it basically stated on number 3 or number 4, actual cash return to the federal and state agencies from FY 2008 to FY 2020 increased to 14.4 million. And the goal is to have this at 0. So that 14.4 million was returned. And there's also the, I believe that's it. That's the money that we return based on this compilation of all the external funds from 2008 to 2020. And for the question about page 35 of the notes to the basic financial statements, I refer that to Moss Adams.
Well, thank you, Acting Controller Ms. Begay. We'll turn the floor over to Tasha. Tasha, you have the floor.
Point of order, Speaker.
Thank you. Vice Chair Smith, hold on real quick. Madam Chair, point of order.
Speaker, I just wanted to make sure I heard correctly from Controller Begay. She did say 14.4 million. Is that correct?
Madam Controller.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you. That, Vice Chair Smith.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Turn the floor over to Moss Adams. Tasha, you have the floor.
Thank you. I understood correctly, there were 2 questions about some of the information in the nation's investment disclosures. As it relates to the question on foreign currency risks, the accounting standards require anytime there are holdings that are held in non-US dollar denominations, that some additional disclosure is required because there could be risks about differences in the valuation due to differences in exchange rates. The nation's policies allow investments in foreign companies, and I believe the total of those was 744 million. Additionally, there wasn't a question about the 5.5 million that was pledged as a certificate, as a security for the debt of the Navajo Nation Hospitality Enterprise. It was a security pledge that the nation made. If there was a question as to why that occurred, I would defer that to OOC.
Thank you, Tasha, for that response. At this point in time, Speaker, I'd like to turn the floor back over to you regarding the questions that are still pending from the Nomination Council. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. That, colleagues, let me go again. I don't have anybody else in the queue. No one texted in on legislation 0169-21. We are on the main motion. Let me go back to reserve time. Honorable Keelan Begay, 32 seconds.
Speaker, one question. Retirement funds, what's the position that you see from your auditing? Reserve my time.
Reserve time with 20 seconds. Moving on down. Honorable Vice Chair Slater, 3 minutes and 7 seconds.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I think that, how to say this, for a nation that has about $7 billion in assets and things that need to be reviewed, I'm pretty impressed by, I don't know if we'd say the level of findings or the lack of really significant ones or questioned or disallowable costs. And I hope that as we move forward in subsequent fiscal years, that those findings continue to decrease in both severity and numbers. And some of these items we need to take into account in the annual fiscal year budget so that we can rectify them, particularly the IT issues where I see we need to make some investments. With that, Speaker, I will yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
That, I'm gonna go back to Vice Chair Smith.
Speaker, Lodge doesn't thank you for the time to respond back to Honorable Kealan Begay. I will turn the floor over to Tasha Moss Adams. Tasha, you have the floor.
Thank you. I believe the outstanding question for me was to point to some of the additional information about the nation's pensions and balances. There are two primary places that I would point you to get additional information on the pension. The first place is going to be the more detailed information, which is the financial statement note disclosures about the nation's pension plan. That information starts on page 49 of the PDF or 46 of the hard copy of the financial statements. That note disclosure includes information about how many participants are in the plan, about the assets that have currently been set aside in the plan, and about the expected liability that will be paid out to support those pension plan payments. Right now, the total pension plan assets, and pardon me, I got to get to a different page here. The total pension plan assets, it's easiest to see that on page 16 of the PDF or page 13 of the hard copy. And there is currently 1.1 billion of pension trust fund assets to pay future pension obligations. I believe that was the only question, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Tasha, for that response to Honorable Kealan Begay. Speaker Damon, we will turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you very much. With that, colleagues, we are on legislation 0169-21. We've been on this legislation 2 hours now. This legislation is final authority here at council. Colleagues, I don't have anybody else in the queue at this time. But I do have one of our colleagues, Honorable Kealan Begay, 20 seconds on reserve time.
Speaker, I do appreciate the audit reporting. The one last question would be that of all the tribes that you have been working with, how do you compare with the Navajo Nation with the other tribes in terms of the financial stability? Chairman, I waive the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. That, Vice Chair Smith, refer back to your agent.
Well, thank you, Speaker, Nomination Council. Appreciate the question that's posed, and that is a good question, I should say. I will turn the floor over to Moss Adams. They are independent auditors. Therefore, Tasha, you have the floor.
you once again. And yes, that is a good question. It is a little hard to compare tribe to tribe because some tribes prioritize expending money to provide current services to their citizens, where other tribes have prioritized setting aside money to invest in the future. So it's very difficult to kind of compare on an apples to apples basis, but I will reiterate the comment that I made earlier, which is again, looking at the statement of net position for the nation, that the nation currently has 6.6 billion in assets, but only 1.4 billion in liabilities. And so that is a ratio that is often used when looking at the financial health of entities, about how much of your assets is already obligated to be paid out versus how much of your assets is available to be reinvested for the future. And having 5 billion of assets out of 6.6 billion, 5 billion of net position out of 6.6 billion of assets is a healthy ratio. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha Rep, for that response. At this point in time, Speaker, I think we've covered the most that we can to our ability, and God bless you all. And we have a great Navajo Nation, and we have our audit completed, and we are ready to move forward. If there's no other questions, Speaker, we'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you. Yeah.
Thank you. With that, colleagues, I don't have anybody else in the queue. I do have individuals that are, well, they're just texting in their vote. But colleagues, I don't have anybody else on reserve time too as well. So with that, is there any other comments or questions on legislation 0169-21? Going twice. Going 3 times. Let's go to the board.
Speaker.
Honorable Almer Begay.
How about green?
Honorable Almer Begay votes green. Honorable Calvin Begay Jr.
I'll get Calvin votes green.
Honorable Calvin Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Paul Begay Jr.
Delegate Paul Begay votes green.
Honorable Paul Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown votes green.
Honorable Nathaniel Brown votes green. Honorable Amber Knausbach Crotty.
Shema Delegate Amber Knausbach Crotty, I vote green. Thank you.
Honorable Amber Knausbach Crotty votes green.
Email.
Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton.
Charles Newton votes green.
Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton votes green. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. did not vote. Honorable Mark Freeland.
Green.
Honorable Mark Freeland votes green. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona. Honorable Pernell Halona did not vote. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James did not vote. Honorable Ricky Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez votes green.
Honorable Ricky Nez votes green. Honorable Carl Slater.
Delegate Slater, green.
Honorable Carl Slater votes green. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. did not vote. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Green.
Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. votes green. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So via text votes green. Honorable Charlene So is excused. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Eugene So is excused. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
I vote green.
Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. votes green. Honorable Edison Juanico. Honorable Edison Juanico. Honorable Edison Juanico votes green. Honorable Evan Yazzie.
Green.
Honorable Evan Yazzie votes green. Honorable Jimmy Ellihare.
I vote green.
Honorable Jimmy Ellihare votes green. Going back up, Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. did not vote. Honorable Fanal Halona.
Honorable votes green.
Honorable Fanal Halona votes green. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Lynch James. Honorable Lynch James. Honorable Lynch James did not vote. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Green.
Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. votes green. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 17 in favor, 0 opposed, and 2 excused. Mr. Speaker, not voting. Mr. Speaker?
Thank you. That colleague, 17 in favor, 0 opposed. Speaker not voting, motion carries. On legislation 0169-21. That colleagues, let's move on down. Item number B on our agenda, legislation 0178-21. Mr. Rico, if you could read into the record, this legislation is sponsored by Honorable Eugene So, co-sponsored by Honorable Daniel So, co-sponsored by Honorable Vice Chair Walker.
Thank you, Speaker. Member of the 24th Navajo Nation Council, tracking number 0178-21, an action relating to an emergency and the Navajo Nation Council enacting COVID-19 vaccination requirements for all Navajo Nation government employees, urging all Navajo Nation-owned enterprises, authorities, corporations, and schools, businesses, and other entities operating within the Navajo Nation to promptly adopt COVID-19 vaccination requirements. Legislation is sponsored by Honorable Eugene So, co-sponsored by Honorable Chairman Daniel E. So, and co-sponsored by Honorable Vice Chair Thomas Walker Jr. There are no committee reports. This Navajo Nation Council is final authority. This legislation will go across the street to the President, Mr. Speaker. Oh, per Navajo Nation Council Rules of Order Rule 9, legislation has been read into the record by electronic voice recording. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. That colleagues, is there a motion on legislation 0178-21?
Motion.
Motion, Delegate Paul Begay.
Honorable Hona, second by Honorable Paul Begay. Colleagues, any comments, questions? Went twice. Went 3 times. Let's go to the board.
Honorable Amr Begay.
I vote green.
Honorable Amr Begay votes green. Honorable Kealan Begay Jr.
Delegate
Honorable
Kealan
Kealan.
Jr. votes green. Thank you.
Honorable Kealan Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Paul Begay Jr.
Delegate Paul Begay votes green.
Honorable Paul Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown
Honorable
votes red.
Honorable Nathaniel Brown votes red. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton did not vote. Honorable Amber Knizlak-Crotty.
Shabbat Delegate Amber Knizlak-Crotty, and I vote green. Thank you.
Honorable Amber Knizlak-Crotty votes green. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. did not vote. Honorable Mark Freeland.
Green.
Honorable Mark Freeland votes green. Honorable Fanal Halona.
Vote green.
Honorable Fanal Halona votes green. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Rich James. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James did not vote. Honorable Ricky Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez votes green.
Honorable Ricky Nez votes green. Honorable Carl Slater.
Please come back to me in the
Carl
second
Slater.
call. Please come back to me in the second call.
Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. did not vote. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Red.
Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. votes red. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Otto So did not vote. Honorable Charlene So is excused. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Eugene So is excused. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. did not vote. Honorable Edison Monica. Honorable Edison Monica. Honorable Edison Monica did not vote. Honorable Edwin Yazzie.
Red.
Honorable Edwin Yazzie votes red. Honorable Jimmy Elliher.
I vote green, thank you.
Honorable Jimmy Elliher votes green. Going back up. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newman.
I vote green.
Honorable Eugenia Charles
Monica
Newman
votes
green.
red.
Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. did not vote. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James did not vote. Honorable Carl Slater.
Question of
Honorable
privilege,
Carl
Speaker.
Slater.
Question of privilege, Speaker.
Question and privilege while we were voting, Honorable Vice Chair Slater. What was yours?
Thank you. Can you have the Chief Legislative Counsel confirm that this doesn't compel anyone, but instead it merely urges the entities that are identified? I cannot get a copy of this legislation to load. My data has been incredibly poor today. So that's the question I have before I vote. I need that information.
Off Legislative Council.
Speaker, I apologize. There was noise in the background. Can Delegate Slater please repeat his question?
My question is, I would like clarification that this does not compel anyone, but rather urges the individuals associated with the entities identified to get the vaccine.
Yes. What it does is it mandates vaccines for employees and urges for central government employees and urges enterprises, schools, and other external entities to establish vaccination policies and requirements. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you.
Speaker, question, the privilege, point of order.
A question of privilege or is it a point of order?
Both, Speaker. My vote on this is red. Okay. Thank you.
We have you down as red, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That, Honorable Slater, for voting. Continue.
I'll vote green, Speaker.
Honorable Carl Slater votes green. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Red.
Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. votes red. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So did not vote. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
I vote green.
Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. votes green. Honorable Edison Monico.
Point of order, Delegate Crowdy.
Green.
Honorable Edison Monico votes green.
Hold on, Ms. Villa. Point of order, Madam Chair Amber Crotty.
I'm sorry, Speaker. It's actually a question of privilege. The legislation to legislative council, the legislation states this is enacted. Is that right? 45 days after, and if I could get clarification, and then is there an end date? How long this legislation will be in effect? Thank you, Speaker. I'm not sure if there's a typo.
Yeah, council delegates. This is Chad Beta from Office of Legislative Counsel.
Okay, thank you, Chad.
Chairwoman Crotty. The question is, or the answer is that yes, it's stated 45 days. That way, it's if you receive the first vaccination dose, it's usually taken, and then you have to wait 2 weeks, and then so in a time frame to have it all to get fully vaccinated take about at least a month, and so at least 45 days gives adequate time to get vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you. That colleagues continue voting.
Speaker Damon, this is Delegate
Daniels Jr.
Question of privilege.
Question of privilege. Hold on, Ms. Villa. Question of privilege, Madam Chair Amber Crotty.
Yes, Speaker. The second part of my question was, when does this legislation, is there an end date?
Ms. Barbara.
I can't find language in there if it ends like when the state of emergency is lifted. I just need to know what page and line. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. There is no specific end date.
Okay, thank you. That colleagues, we'll go back to Ms. Uvella. We are voting on legislation 0178-21.
Honorable Herman M. Daniels. Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr. did not vote. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Vince James did not vote. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So did not vote. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Vince James votes green. With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 13 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 excused. Mr. Speaker, not voting. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Speaker Damon, Honorable Speaker Damon, Delegate Rick Nez, I changed my vote to red.
After she's reminded that she locked the door, so it's okay, she has.
Ms. Barbara. Okay, there you go. Chairman Nez, change your vote to red.
With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 12 in favor, 5 opposed, 2 excused. Mr. Speaker, not voting.
Hey, thank you. That on legislation.
Daniel, Speaker, I vote red.
Honorable Daniels votes red.
Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr. votes red. With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 12 in favor, 6 opposed, 2 excused. Mr. Speaker, not voting.
Hey, thank you. With that, 12 in favor, 6 opposed, Speaker not voting, motion carries on legislation 0178-21. That, colleagues, continuing on down. Item number 7, we're closed the session, announcements and adjournment. Colleagues, I know tomorrow there is just for announcements. There Eastern Navajo Land Commission meeting, And then there's a special health education, human services committee meeting. And then I know the budget and finance committee will reconvene too as well. And then last but not least, there's an Eastern Agency Council meeting on Saturday. I'm not too sure what else. I think that's it. What's the will of the
This is
committee?
Delegate Charles Newman.
Madam Chair Charles Newton.
Speaker, put me in the queue. Vice Chair Smith.
Speaker, colleagues, I would like to motion to amend the floor rules to add on Honorable Vince James's legislation. I believe that was the request by colleagues. I reserve my time.
Going back, Madam Chair Charles Newton, to motion to amend the agenda. Madam Chair, this will need 16 votes to add on legislation 125-21 onto the agenda. Is there a second? Second, going twice. And this is adding on 0125-21 onto the agenda. Going 3 times. Thank you, colleagues. Moving on down, Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Navajo Nation 24th Navajo Nation Council, and those that are listening in. Thank you for approving the legislation for the audit. However, Speaker, I'd like to make an announcement, and we are very thankful and grateful for the answered prayers and the good Lord helping us and the good Lord guiding us in this behalf. I'd like to give him the glory for that. We are going to have a bridge dedication on Wednesday, September 1st at 2 p.m. at Cesa Ana 9402. So Speaker and RDC members of the Navajo Nation Council and delegates that can attend, I would appreciate your presence, and we are honored to and happy about the new bridge that has finally come to pass, and we do have a new bridge. So I'd like to announce that, and Untitled Chapter they're going to be sponsoring the dedication along with FNF Construction, BIA, NDOT, and the honorable delegates of the Resource Development Committee that made this possible, especially Mr. Garrett finding the funding and also negotiating, and also with the help from Honorable Stewart Will, who's been really helpful in making this happen. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. We'll send that flyer out too once it's forwarded over to us on that dedication next Wednesday. That, colleagues, there is one more announcement. We are having a next Tuesday, a meet and greet here in the chambers. If you're going to be here in person or over the phone with the new BIA director, regional director for our area. Hi, colleagues, if there's no other announcements, what's the will of the committee? Is there a motion?
Motion by Vice Chair Smith, adjourn.
Motion by Vice Chair Smith to adjourn at 5:34 p.m. Is there a second?
Stewart. Second,
Stewart. Hey, with that, let's go to board. This one right here.
Honorable Elmer Begay.
How about green?
Honorable Elmer Begay votes green. Honorable Calvin Begay Jr.
I'll get Calvin Begay Jr. votes green.
Calvin Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Paul Begay Jr.
Delegate Paul Begay votes green.
Honorable Paul Begay Jr. votes green. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not vote. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton.
Charles Newman votes green.
Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton votes green. Honorable Amber Knisbach-Crotty.
Shama, Delegate Amber, Cadence Body, and I vote green. Thank you.
Amber Kenneth Clardy votes green. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. Honorable Herman Daniels Jr. did not vote. Honorable Mark Phelan.
I vote green. I vote Christina Daniel.
Honorable Mark Phelan. Honorable Mark Phelan did not vote. Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr. votes green. Honorable Canal Halona.
Halona votes green.
Honorable Canal Halona votes green. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Vince James.
Delegate James votes green.
Honorable Vince James votes green. Honorable Ricky Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez votes green.
Honorable Ricky Nez votes green. Honorable Carl Slater. Honorable Carl Slater.
Delegate Slater, green.
Honorable Carl Slater votes green. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Green.
Honorable Raymond Smith Jr. votes green. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Green.
Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr. votes green. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So does not vote. Honorable Charlene So is excused. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So does not vote. Honorable Eugene So is excused. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
I vote green.
Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. votes green. Honorable Edison Juanica.
Green.
Honorable Edison Juanica votes green. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie did not vote. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair.
I vote
Jimmy
green.
Yellowhair
Thank
did not.
you.
Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair votes green. Going back up, Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Nathaniel Brown did not vote. Honorable Mark Phelan. Honorable Mark Phelan. Honorable Mark Phelan did not vote. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo. Honorable Jamie Henyo did not vote. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Otto So did not vote. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So. Honorable Daniel So did not vote. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. With that, Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 15 in favor, 0 opposed, 2 excused. Mr. Speaker, not voting.
Delegate
Mr.
Brown
Speaker.
votes green.
Honorable Nathaniel Brown votes green. Mr. Speaker, you have a vote of 16 in favor, 0 opposed, 2 excused. Mr. Speaker, not voting.
Thank you. With that, colleagues, 16 in favor, 0 opposed, motion carries. We're officially adjourned. That, safe travels, colleagues. See you when you see you. Have a good weekend.